Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today's February 3rd, 2023. Let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? So, this first slide represents the Russian gains around Bakhmut since April 2022. So, over 9 months, you can see that they've only managed to push the Ukrainian forces about 25 to 30 kilometers, and they still haven't managed to take Bakhmut. So, 9 months, 25, 30-kilometer gains, and 50,000 dead Russian soldiers just on this front alone. You tell me if that's a good performance for the second best army in the world. And as you can see here, I've wrote a very important thought that I had today is that I always talk about, the Leopard 2s, the Abrams, the F-16s. Yes, they're going to be very important and they're also game changing. But the biggest game changers right now is going to be the long range missiles of 150 kilometers and plus. So just like the HIMARS systems, if we look at the map here, just like the HIMARS systems back in the summer when Ukraine received them, Ukraine was not on the initiative. They were still defending in Donbas. And as you remember, back then the Russians grabbed Severodonetsk, they captured Lysychansk, and it was a difficult moment for the Ukrainians because they were no match to the Russian artillery. As soon as the Ukrainians got the HIMARS in late June, early July, they started destroying all the barracks, the ammunition depots, the logistical lines that were very close to the front lines, which were about 40, 50 kilometers away from the front lines. Because back then, the Russians didn't feel a threat from the Ukrainian artillery that didn't have a massive range, right? The maximum that they had was perhaps 30 to 40 kilometers with the Pion systems, which were the Soviet artilleries. I think they have a maximum range of about 50, but they were very limited, limited in terms of the numbers that the Ukrainians had. So they obviously felt very comfortable keeping their barracks close here. The logistical lines were set up very close, and we saw hundreds of videos of the Ukrainians striking these bases full of ammunition and just exploding on a daily basis. And that weakened the Russians, which then set the ground for the offensives that we saw in Kharkiv and in Kherson. But now, of course, the Russians are also human and they learn from their mistakes. And so they start setting up their logistical lines, their bases, their ammunition depots much further away from the HIMARS range, right? The HIMARS has about 80 to 85 kilometers of range. So now what is important for the Ukrainians to be able to hit these bases much deeper. And these 150-kilometer range pretty much sets the Ukrainians allows the Ukrainians to be able to hit these barracks, these bases, pretty much within all occupied territories and even within Russia. So this is going to be the biggest game changer. However, the unfortunate thing is that the United States is saying that these GLS DBs are only going to be coming within the next 6 to 9 months. And the earliest that we're talking about is late spring 2023. And I'm assuming probably because they need to produce them and also train the Ukrainians how to use them. So I think this is going to be very late, and hopefully Ukraine is going to be getting them much sooner. So this is my little my thoughts about the long range missiles. Let me know what you think about what I just said about it. In terms of the map developments, let's take a look at what happened. The hottest front, Bakhmut, you already know it. The Russians are now concentrating at pushing north of Soledar. They've taken a small village called Sako I Vantseti, a very strange name. This is not Ukrainian at all. But you see here that they're trying to push here. And I think their main goal is to continue pushing north and then perhaps trying to cut off the Ukrainians on this highway that leads into Slovyansk. Right, Slovyansk and Kramatorsk are the two biggest cities remaining, along with Bakhmut in the Ukrainian-held territories in Donbas. So the Russians are trying to go for these two. And so I think that they're trying to really start pushing towards this highway here. And south of Bakhmut, the situation hasn't changed since the last video. The Russians are really effectively trying to take this highway leading to Bakhmut and this highway leading into, by default, to Bakhmut, to Krasna Hora, and then into Bakhmut. So I think that if the Russians are going to be capable of taking control of this highway and have control of this highway, I think it's going to be serious time for the Ukrainian army to start considering a pullout into Chasiv Yar or into more defensible second lines of defenses along these villages and settlements. It's not worth it to hold Bakhmut just for the image that the Ukrainians are strong and they have been holding Bakhmut for 9 months. They have done more than enough to hold the Russians following all these crazy attacks that they've been doing over 9 months. And I think that it's not a matter of image, it's a matter of positional warfare. And it makes sense for the Ukrainians to pull out as soon as they're under serious threat. We don't want to repeat the mistakes that were done back in 2014 and 2015 with Ilovaisk and the Baltseve, where the Ukrainians were surrounded by the Russians and the DPR LNR, and the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense decided that they would stay because it didn't look good in their eyes, that the Ukrainians were pulling out. And this caused massive casualties for the Ukrainians once they realized they needed to pull out. And obviously, the Russians didn't agree for a green corridor, but then they started shelling the Ukrainian army. So we cannot have a repeat of this situation here. So that's it for the map. The other thing, actually, I forgot to mention is that the Russians have indicated that they have paused their offensive all across Zaporizhia and most importantly in Vuhledar, where they've had massive losses. And they are claiming that this is due to weather issues, but we all know why. They've pretty much lost so many vehicles, so many soldiers here that they just don't have the capacity anymore to throw another wave of attack here. So they're probably doing a pause to regroup, rearm, and perhaps launch another attack in the next few weeks, just as we've seen back in October and early November in Pavlivka. So in terms of map updates, that's about it. Bakhmut is very hot, Vuhledar has stopped, and the Russians continue to push around Donetsk with no gains at all. So let's head back into the slides. And the other thing I wanted to discuss is the Institute of War pulled out another assessment saying that the major Russian offensive, which is planned to be perhaps, and I believe it's going to be end of this February, due to the celebration of the 1-year attack, Russian invasion in Ukraine. So they are assessing that it will not be successful, that Putin is again overestimating his military's ability. And there's no observed evidence that the Russian forces have restored sufficient combat power to defeat Ukraine's forces in the east of Ukraine and capture over 42% of the remaining Donbas area in Donetsk before March, at least. And so a major Russian offensive before April 2023 would likely prematurely culminate during the April spring rain season before achieving operationally significant effects. So essentially, they're saying that the Russians are not going to be able to get any of these victories that they want to get by end of March. And, this is another fictional date that was given by Putin, end of March. We already heard these fictional dates in 2022, where they were supposed to take Donbas by April 2022, and then it was pushed back, and the same with Kherson and other oblasts. Again, this is good for the Ukrainian side because this pushes the leadership within the Russian Ministry of Defense to do dumb decisions because now they're rushed. And in my opinion, obviously, with this offensive that's going to happen, there's no doubt that Russia is going to be able to advance and do a lot of damage, but it's going to be very minimal. As we've seen with Bakhmut, for 9 months, they've only pushed 25 to 30 kilometers. It's terrible. So, Rheinmetall, the German arms maker, is planning to restore 88 Leopard 1s, and it's probably going to be the Leopard 185, and is going to be sending them to Kiev. And this is going to be for the price tag of 100 million euros. So it's about $1 million-ish per tank. You can see that I assume it's going to be the latest or the most modern iteration of the Leopard 1, which is the 1A5. Overall, I think it's a decent tank. It's not the modern tanks like the Leopard 2s. It's not up to par, but it's still much better than, let's say, the M113s that Ukrainians are using, the Spartan APCs, or or any of these outdated Soviet tanks that Ukraine is currently operating, especially the T-64s. This tank was built to combat T-62s, T-64s, so I think that it is a good match even against the T-72s that the Russians have. You can see here that its mounted gun, it has a cannon of 105 millimeters, not the NATO standard 120 millimeters, but still very strong cannon, lightweight, which is very important. It's a very lightweight tank that can maneuver much better than the heavier tanks that Ukraine has, about 40 tons. Has a maximum speed of about 65 kilometers per hour, and has about a range of 600 kilometers. So overall, a solid tank. I think it's going to do a lot of good for the Ukrainians, and hopefully they're going to be getting them in the next few weeks. So good news coming out of Germany again. On a less happy, more negative note, this is terrible, terrible, terrible news, but not surprising, obviously. But the Russians are abducting Ukrainian children that are without relatives, that pretty much are orphans, and shooting sexual videos, so pornographic videos with them. And you can see here that on one of the telegrams that was found by the ombudsman, the Ukrainian ombudsman, that a boy was being sold for about 130,000 hryvnias. And essentially, it was disgusting because these images were also shared, and they were discussing, the size of the boy and how old he was and things like that. It was just absolutely atrocious, the discussions that were had there. And there's just something about Russia that just breeds more and more people than anywhere else in the world. Like, it's unbelievable. There's no words that can describe this evil. No words, absolutely nothing that can describe these people that are committing these atrocities on children less than 5 years, 6 years. They've already suffered so much, and yet they continue on giving more suffering to these innocent children. I have no words. And this proves yet again that Ukraine needs to win this. It's never been more clear that Ukraine is the side of good and Russia stands by the side of evil. So, this is a somewhat realistic rant by Salivs in his show. So let's see what he has to say. This is mostly about the Russian difficulties in the last few months in victories. So he's saying, are we going to war? If so, with what and by whom? If we're seriously campaigning and realize that the special military operation is long over and we are at war with NATO, then maybe something needs to be implemented. Germany is supplying tanks. The German fascist scum is supplying tanks. How angry he is. And training the Bandera bastards on them. We say, well, ha, these tanks are crap. We'll destroy them all. Sure. And we fight on the line. Of contact, 100 meters this way, 100 meters that way. And every time we give an account of what's going on. If we used to talk about hundreds and hundreds of meters, of kilometers that were taken, about cities taken under siege and about settlements, then we started to give them away. Settlements and the whole city, a big city, Kherson city. And now we're discussing how we go from one street to another, question mark. At the same time, we are destroying our ammunition. We are destroying, and there's going to be a cope here, a cope line from Salivs. 300,000 that went through partial mobilization. We're destroying them. They're getting tired. Rotation is necessary. People fight, get wounded, get sick, die. Yes, we're saving them. Yes, casualties are small. That's a funny one. Casualties are small. Thank God they're small. But there's a battle to be fought. Obviously, the general staff is not planning to take over the streets. The task of the general staff is wide and powerful operations, to break through here and there, to go deep, break through, schmake through. But this all needs to be proved. Yes, the industry has swung. I understand all that, but we're not at war with Ukraine. Another cope. And then he's probably going to say we're at war with NATO. So this tells you, it's very surprising. I didn't expect this type of, realistic rant from Solovyov, even though there was a little bit of copium here. But you can see that even he realizes that it's difficult, and this major offensive that's going to be happening, I can't see them, pushing through them fantasizing taking the entirety of Donbas by end of March. It's just not going to happen. And this is Putin, who came out yesterday in one of his events. This was, he came out of his bunker, obviously, in the dozens that he has where he's hiding. I think this was for the celebration of the Leningrad siege. So they had an event yesterday. And so here's a little video of him talking about how Russia is fighting for truth. The most important thing, both when covering the events of World War II, the Great Patriotic War, and when covering the events of the special military operation today, the most important thing is the truth and credibility. It's our most important weapon. Yeah, sure. This makes me think of the book 1994. I imagine most of you have read it. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. This is Putin. That the Russians are protecting the truth, credibility. It's their most important weapon. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed my video. Please subscribe to my channel. It really helps me with producing more videos. I'm planning to create new content as well. And I'll release some of these new videos that I'm planning in the next few weeks. And if you enjoy my videos, please leave me a like and leave me a comment about what you think about what I said for the long-range missiles that Ukraine is going to be getting and their impact on the battlefield against Russia. And I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.